it's the reason why UX was so appealing, was that ability to have human conversations and to read between the lines and to understand the nuances and the backstories and the context of the human experience. And I would hope that whenever possible, that I would default to how can we become more humanist versus how can we become more efficient.
Welcome to Insights Unlocked, an original podcast from UserTesting, where we bring you candid conversations and stories with the thinkers, doers, and builders behind some of the most successful digital products and experiences in the world, from concept to execution.
Welcome to the Insights Unlocked podcast. I'm Nathan Isaacs, Principal Content Marketing Manager at UserTesting. And joining us today as host is Lija Hogan, a Principal Experience Research Consultant here at UserTesting. Hi there, Lija. Welcome back.
Hi, thank you.
And our guest today is Nick Cawthon. Nick is the founder of Gauge and a veteran UX researcher, designer, and strategist who has spent more than 2 decades helping organizations better understand their users and build better experiences. He's also an educator and outspoken thinker on how AI is reshaping UX research and why human insight may be more important than ever. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Hey, how you doing? Good to see you, Nathan. Hello, Lija.
Awesome. So I'm really excited about our conversation today because I think as everyone is really navigating this new space around where UX is headed, I'm interested in hearing your take. And so before we get started, can we just take a look at your evolution professionally? So how did you go from the early days of digital design and evolve into the current stage of research and strategy work that you're doing? And also, I think your position is human insight's more important than ever. What have you learned along the way that guides you to that?
Yeah, thank you, Lija. I'll take you way back. As we discussed on the pre-call, we have middle school kids that are coming out of summer and back into the fall. And those summer days were pretty formative for me. I was lucky enough to have parents that put me in art camps and activities that were great for me because they allowed me to find what I later realized was a state of flow. I remember specifically there was a time when I was in a church basement and one of the moms gave a group of 6 of us some pen and pencil and left us alone for 15, 20 minutes. And I remember drawing a dog fight, Spitfires and Messerschmitts and planes and explosions. And looking up after that 20 minutes and looking around and being very proud of what I had drawn, but also realizing that I found this sort of state of investment flow. And that had come up several times throughout my development. First day of the first week of college, I remember that same sort of investment in creating a visual craft. And I'm going somewhere with this. This is not all lemonade and saltine cracker stories. And it was a nice indicator for me of here's something that you love to do, that when you do it, time slips away, and that at least in your own assessment, you're good at it. And it's led me down to a path of visual design. I was going to university in the mid-1990s, and things were being designed for CD-ROMs and distributed on physical media. And when I returned back to my native San Francisco Bay Area, these digital media were now being supplanted with 28K modems and, soon to be DSL and, faster speed web connections. And the visual translated from pen and paper or, static discs to now downloadable experiences. And so UI, user interface, was the extension of the human-computer interaction that I was lucky enough to catch wind of. We have the technology companies, both on the hardware and the software side right here in the backyard of Silicon Valley in San Francisco, as well as a adherence to art and technology that still exists to this day. So after school, I returned to the very same institutions that I was in summer camp for, the California College of the Arts here in San Francisco, and they had created this new discipline called design for new media, which was the internet at the time. And I happily signed up for it because I knew that school from middle school, and now as a graduate student began to focus on how do you take these same design principles that all the forefathers and foremothers of the graphic design and industry were now reappropriating for an interactive medium. And that was the early 2000s. I worked my way through graduate school. And then as a younger man, kind of hitting a wall with doing digital design and interaction design, UI design, wanted to go back to school again, and found the University of Sydney was a good place to take a break for a couple of years, as well as do a research degree in data visualization. As I was assigned a mentor who was a leader in that field, the interaction became how do you parse large volumes of data. And then returning back from the university, this notion of user experience began to take shape as sort of founded by Adaptive Path and Jesse James Garrett, and these concepts of it's not so much about what the interface looks like, it's about the experience that the user has with it. And that was revolutionary because now we had these applied behavioral sciences in our toolkit to be able to talk and understand with users where the subjective interface is beginning to fail, where those confusion points are. Because before that, it was all this sort of artistic showcase of your subjective presentation, may be slick and maybe cool, but certainly I can't see where the button or the call to action is, and I can't move through the process very easily. And that to me was amazing, was I didn't have to push pixels anymore. Now I could balance it with conversations with human beings. And I think there's a callback to that notion today as we talk about human insights and UX and what we're experiencing with this next technological revolution. But at the same time, design systems were becoming mature. This notion of UI was becoming commodified because we could go find frameworks and freelancers to build out UI systems much easier than we could before. Project Kennedy at Google became a color by numbers. We've understand these design patterns to know what makes sense, but because before we were trying to really challenge and find the boundaries of what it meant to digest visual information. And then by the mid to late early 2000s, that UI became much more standardized and UX became really a focus on experience rather than presentation and display. So with that mouthful of words and stories, that's my history, is that I went from a middle school kid in a church basement to now leading a consultancy here in San Francisco and focusing on UX research, design, and strategy.
Yeah, which actually that forms a really good jumping off point, because what brings to mind my next question is that focus on the UX and not the UI, because we're really seeing this paradigm shift right now in just how the world works and how we think about design. And so I'm really curious about how do we find this balance between figuring out what that new paradigm should be with the fact that we can make experiences, and when I say make experiences, make prototypes, make visual representations, or even if it's not a visual representation, some sort of representation of what the flow is supposed to look like faster. And, that means you can make a lot of great stuff and also a lot of not so great stuff. And so, kind of with that, what helps people build a competitive advantage when you have access to that scale, but maybe not as informed a view around what the new paradigm should be from an experience standpoint?
Yeah, I think the core of that question is what helps build a competitive advantage. my practice has always been fairly technical, and prototyping has been something that is mandatory, to look at even screens or printing it out on paper, or to have this assimilation of what an interactive experience is supposed to be. Is just that. It's a facsimile, and I have always pushed into prototyping and then asking them to go to A to B. Figma, for all of its strengths, is still horrible at prototyping. They've really never grasped it. And the InDesign before that, and then the Sketch before that, prototyping for designers have traditionally been hotspots and image maps, very little typing and tabbing, and the way that we typically engage with software. And so that gap, or that delta between design tools and development tools, is still today quite wide. However, with the advent of some of these new technologies, you can spin up what is a very, very close assimilation of an end product extremely quickly. And you can abide by design systems, and you can abide by code components, and make sure that whatever it is that you're developing is going to be as close as possible to the end product. And therefore, when you do, shameless plug, user testing for these prototypes, it can be a high fidelity one. And I think, going back to your question directly, you asked about competitive advantage. With this velocity and this speed to ideate and test, an advantage is our ability to iterate, is to be humble, and to be objective, to know that what the algorithm has presented to us, or what we have guided it to show, may not be the right one. And to have that sense of iteration, to present multiple directions and multiple flows, and to really be able to listen and understand where those failings are, I think that's the advantage. It's not only the velocity, but it's also the humility to go back and test yourself, to make sure that what the algorithm put out is in fact what the user wanted.
Wow, that's, I think, really critical to keep in mind, because that means that, essentially you can put more iterations, different strategies in front of folks really quickly. Mm-hmm. It also makes it really easy to fall into that trap of being very tactical and instead of taking a step back and asking the question, did we build the right thing to begin with? And I think that's, that assumption is built into a lot of usability testing. Mm-hmm. So I guess really my question is, how do we ensure that as designers or design researchers or product folks or whoever is building something are thinking through how to do it, we don't get stuck in that tactical trap of, did the button work? Yeah. But rather are thinking at that more strategic level of, is this the right thing that the button is enabling people to navigate through? Yeah.
You bring up notions of service design, and experience design, where we're looking at that life cycle from A to B. And yet that button is one small, as you mentioned, usability flaw to it. But I shouldn't be on this screen in the first place because I'm trying to finish this task or finish this process, which is taking me way too long and with too many manual tasks. And I think that is where, when you have those exploration sessions, the generative thoughts that are bringing in your target personas to talk about what the landscape is and what the workflow is, those are techniques that you can do, and not sort of stay so tactical that you don't quite, you're not able to escape that quick A to B, but you're allowing that time to breathe, and to expand about where the frustrations on the workflow. There's this notion of swivel chair, where especially true in DevOps and system administrators, where it's the context switching from task to task or from platform to platform, and to be able to recognize when this is occurring, and that your end user is now having to again shift context and mode. And that's where errors occur, and that's where frustration occur, and that's where fatigue occurs. In the case of DevOps and system administrators, it's also where vulnerabilities start to increase because shortcuts get taken. You don't see those until you take a step back and try to understand what's going on over the course of the day, or over a task rather than a specific interaction or experience.
Yeah. And, I think that even taking that time is an important consideration, because now with AI, we've got to figure out that balance between immersion and what it is that we think about, right? Mm-hmm. And then also how do we actually get all the work done that we need to get done? And so in your work or in your experience to date, because I know this is a rapidly changing landscape, what are you finding are some of the best practices around what you delegate to AI or collaboratively with AI? Because I won't say you completely delegate things, versus things that you reserve for primarily human responsibility.
Yep.
In the research process.
I had a colleague over the summer who graduated Cal Poly out of their honors program and was applying to law schools in the fall. And she said that maybe a third of the academic institutions, their screening conversations were done with an agent and not an alum or a member of the admissions board, but it was having an algorithm parse your responses and then either reject you or accept you onto the next step. That seemed very harsh to me. That representation of an academic institution, which is going to be a 3-year investment on both sides, to put an agent in front of an initial conversation about goals, outcomes, fears, desires, is something that I would hope to never have to do. That being said, I'm not a top tier law school and I don't have an admissions policy, but it is the reason that going back to UI versus UX, it's the reason why UX was so appealing, was that ability to have human conversations and to read between the lines and to understand the nuances and the backstories and the context of the human experience. And I would hope that whenever possible, that I would default to how can we become more humanist versus how can we become more efficient. It's hyperbole in the sense that I've already described a couple of experiences. One is a generative session with your end users to talk about things holistically versus, the tactical is what button color should it be. And the opposite is true, where early days were transcriptions and indexing and tagging and that parsing of qualitative data. That's an extremely laborious task, one of which a lot of us have done in our career, is to go and scrub transcripts of conversations. And I think that there's an advantage to that. There's a reflection and a pause and a way of sort of synthesizing as you're going through that process. But it's also one that's extremely inefficient and costly. And that our language models are trained to do just those things. And so that's a balance of wanting to make sure when there's an opportunity for a human connection, just like our conversation we have between you and I, that we do so in a manner that is responsible and emotional, and that but where there are efficiency gains of maybe scrubbing transcripts or tagging or indexing, starting to inform personas, but not trying to duplicate them. Those are some hard barriers that I have. Is I don't want to ever think that I am creating a bot or an extension of a human experience when that is not yet why I use these algorithms.
Yeah, I think there are a series of very good points in that. I think, the first one is just there are certain things where a human touch needs to happen just because ethically it's the right thing to do.
Yep.
Like fundamentally, yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I want to build in a harness for any project so that we can collect as much data as possible. I think there's also a lot of ethical A lot of ethical issues that are coming up. One of the things that, as experienced researchers, that you and I are taught to do is to be extremely ethical with how we value people's time and their privacy. We transfer the power to them at the beginning of our conversation. We tell them that if you want to pause or take this off the record at any point, the power is yours, because if you feel comfortable, you're going to feel honest, and our conversation is going to be better. I think there's examples of, if I can get your conversation and transcribe it, I can feed it to the model, and my model will be better, because there are all of these input points that are previously unavailable. Is that ethically we're going to start to really make this more important to showcase honesty and candor about how we are or we are not using these technologies. The assimilation of personas into chatbots and algorithms, that the more you can inform, we're creating archetypes, and now instead of having to go out and ask what we've screened and qualified to be a representation of an archetype, that we can train a model to now answer the questions on the behalf of the users. Because how would you, if you are a 45-year-old white male in San Francisco Bay Area, how would you answer this question? And then rather than finding examples of that, it would instead try to guess or assimilate. I don't agree with that quite yet. Yeah, as you alluded to, complicated question, moving targets, a lot of fuzzy barriers there.
Very, very, very much so. And I think here's where I want to shift gears just a little bit, because, in this landscape where we're trying to figure out, what's okay to do, how to do it, becoming more strategic in our thinking. A lot of researchers are in this space. We're trying to build influence with leadership, so that they're coming to us first when it comes to really understanding what our customers need and making decisions that are informed by rigorous research. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we tell great stories. We bring all this beautiful, well-curated data to the table, and those insights still fail to impact what it is that people decide to do, roadmap, whatever the decision is. So I just wanted to ask, are there things that you're finding to be helpful when you are trying to get a decision made that is insights informed?
Yeah. The ubiquitous term of leadership, and we've all had the VPs or the executives of which we're presenting to say, well, now what? What do I do now? I mean, we knew this, so now what? About 3 or 4 years ago, there was the buzzword of the democratization of research, and I interpret it as to be able to make research available to everyone. Is to challenge yourself and your deliverables to not make a presentation that you give, and that when you're done giving it, the insights die, or you print it out on paper and you walk away and that. But instead, to empower yourself to build out portals and experiences and query indexes, so that when the executive does have a thought or does have a query, you are enabling them to do the research themselves. Yes, you present it in your insights and you're building out these portals and these research repositories, but you are also training them so that they are feeling empowered themselves to be able to query and understand the research on their own interpretation. And it may lead to a different interpretation, but that's fine. And so I think that's one part of it, is that our deliverables need to change. And by the way, there are these new shiny tools that if you want to make a research repository for a client, you should be doing that. You should, or finding a partner that can do that for you, and showing that we're delivering our insights in a way that's accessible to you, B, that we are using as much scale and speed in transcription or translation or indexing and querying. This wasn't possible 5 years ago for us to have a bespoke portal for you, the client, to be able to see and index this yourself, and that we're going to build and build and build as different phases of research occur. And then to also sort of put a line in the sand of, we will continue to deliver these humanist experiences, and you have insights to them. There was a client in which we had IDIs, in-home in-depth interviews, and they were low on the organizational maturity of research, but they did have TVs in their lunchrooms, and many of our sessions were during that hour. And so we would live stream, with the consent of the participant, of course, our sessions into the lunchroom, so that all those at the company were watching an ethnographer have a discussion with one of their customers about their products, and the closed captioning and the transcription it was an early effort of trying to get these insights out on display to as many people as possible, being the gatekeepers to the knowledge, being the ones that presented, here's how we look at it, and more of an educator rather than a consultant, and really trying to see how we can democratize research more and more for leadership going forward.
Yeah, so that's interesting, because what I'm hearing is it's just as important to build the level of sophistication organization wide, which then enables leadership to kind of key into, here's how we as a group actually understand what it is that our customers need. Not just trying to put a lever in one specific question.
And the first knock is going to be, oh, it takes so much time and it's so expensive and it's so slow. Analytics that come across the web are instantaneous, but you're telling me you got to recruit, and then you got to screen. First you got to screen, then you got to recruit, and then you got to conduct, and then you got to synthesize. And how long is that going to take? And so to showcase the efficiencies that some of these tools have had in all of those steps, I think is going to be to the advantage of this leadership perspective of, we've gotten to be so much faster. We're building out this structure and this harness for research within our organization that's not only more transparent, but it's faster and it's cheaper for you. However, what we're holding on to is that conversation, is that connection, because nothing substitutes that. You're not going to get that from an algorithm of, why is this frustrating to you, or what can we do to unblock you, or tell us about the holistic experience, rather than that specific button.
Yeah. And kind of to that point, a lot of you talked about the fact that this is expensive and time consuming. Could be, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be as much as it has been traditionally. Mm-hmm. And one of the areas of opportunity that I think a lot of researchers have is being able to put a dollar value to what it is that they're doing. So you spent this money, what's the return? Yeah. And so, I'm curious, how can we as leaders in the UX space attach to that business value more effectively?
Yeah, it's hard. And when you see those in transition in the job market, and you see some of those claims of, I worked on this project, or I led to this outcome, it's sometimes hard to digest. I guided this process and we saw X, Y, and Z. That is something that I think we will always struggle with. You can look at research-led companies, design-led companies, and I'm talking about the Apples and the Airbnbs, and those design-led companies outperform comparable sized companies across industries. And there is a value to this. Have you ever ridden an e-bike, Lija?
Yes.
You remember that first feeling you got when you were on an e-bike for the first time, what that felt like?
Oh, it's kind of indescribable, because it's first weird, because it just feels unnatural. If you've ridden a bike before, it feels unnatural, but then it's just you feel like you're flying.
Yeah, superpowers, right? You feel like you have superpower. And I think that that's happening now in the sense of we've got this ability, at least in the digital design world, to have increased velocity. Like we can go so much faster now. And that doesn't necessarily mean we're going in the right direction. And it's not any cheaper to go, this is the e-bike metaphor, to go faster in the wrong direction, because if you make that mistake, then all of a sudden you're further off target than you were if you went along procedurally. And so in terms of value, or connecting the value of research, what we're doing is teaching people A, how to read a map, B, how to change the tire or fix the chain, and to do basic bike maintenance, because you could be, again, way across town in the wrong way and not quite sure why the bike doesn't work or where I'm at on the map. So what we're doing is balancing cost savings of engineering, of design and development with strategy and research, so that we can keep achieving this velocity, but knowing that we're still following the right path. We're still going the right bike route, going down the right road.
Yeah, I feel like you should be having this conversation with my colleague, because he is very much on about this concept very frequently. Because it's very much there are a lot of people who have this concern out there right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's hard to know. I think we're not yet lost. We're still in that superpower moment of this is exhilarating, and look at this speed, and look at the ability to prototype, or maybe we should just launch the thing and see if it fails. Like there's a certain arrogance of knowing we're doing the right thing before we do things right. The British Design Council double diamond metaphor of first of all, we have a thought that's generative, and then we think about synthesis of making sure that we're doing it right. And I think that we are still in this sense of wonder of look how fast this thing can go, but there's not yet that fallback of, why aren't we seeing the revenue, the churn rate, or all those metrics of, this goes back to, again, the original question. Well, let's look at churn rate. Did we reduce the churn rate? Abandonment, right? Cart abandonment. Those are commerce metrics that a user researcher can track if they're focusing on those parts of the product. Maybe not revenue as a company, that could be too holistic of an assumption, but you can certainly improve the tactical, the interaction, and those kind of conversion rates, and that'll lead to money and revenue and big dollar signs.
Yeah, and I feel that point is really critical to understand, because I think a lot of people assume that if you cannot make it a direct attachment to those higher level metrics, then it's just impossible to do that. And actually, it underestimates the importance of the accumulation of all of the right things going right on the way to get that top level number to be what it is that you want it to be. So out there, you can do it.
Yeah.
I've done.
Showcase the number of conversations and the number of personas and the engagement with the product team and the design team, and the interest to talk about how integral you are into this process. And you are alleviating the role of the executive, because they don't have to come in and command what they see their vision to be. Is that you've got evidence-backed decisions that are helping influence and making their job easier. Because now you're acting as the voice of strategy rather than instinct or impulse.
Yeah, that's so important. Thought and intention is critical. And I think, kind of going into this last question I have for you, which is really around how do people future-proof their job? I think a lot of researchers are very worried about the future of the profession. What are the things that we can do that can help us to ensure that we've got a future?
Yeah, let's talk about the future. The future is here. What do? I look at people that can do it faster, cheaper, maybe not better, but faster and cheaper, certainly. And I wonder, what can I still bring to the table, especially as somebody who's mid let's just say mid-career. I think that there's a reluctance to learn because of the stigma that it brings. With AI, the first 18 months of it washing across the bow of this profession was traumatic. And it's true from the design standpoint as well as research, is that there are these waves and tools, and I don't think any of us are immune to it. Certainly not software engineers, certainly not product managers, and certainly not designers and researchers. But you, the humanist, are the glue between these teams. You are the one that's supposed to understand human beings better than anyone. Your deliverable is human being. And so if what is being challenged is all of our investment, all of our emotion, then you as the researcher should be the one that can bring that back together. And that goes for, how do we design and engineer human experiences amongst those of us in the team, as well as those of us, our constituents, so that we can start to understand each other and the dialogue of the insights and the challenges and the course corrections that need to make. And I think that is something that should be an inherent core competency. Maybe we're not all natural extroverts. Maybe we're not all natural organizers or planners of things like workshops or insight sessions or interviews or things like that. But it is really something that is irreplaceable. If there's nobody that likes being in a cube away from other coworkers and just sits off to the side. We all want to be engaged with one another. And so that would be my future proof. There's so much more of an emphasis on real life experiences professionally these days, and they may not be the same ones that we experienced even as recent as 10 years ago. But those kinds of networking and meetup and salons and ambassadorship programs, and I would overinvest in making yourself integral, whether it be within an internal corporate department or whether it be as an association of professionals. I think those are two things at any stage of your career that make you A, future-proof, B, invaluable, and C, understanding of what's going on with the industry and your peers.
Yeah, I think connection, I'm definitely seeing people behaving in that way naturally too. So that's a great, call out, find your local meetup. There are so many. I know even where I sit, usually in Michigan, we're restarting up Michigan UXPA. Mm-hmm. So yeah, total testament to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Awesome. So thank you so much for being on the show. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I think, our listeners will very much get a ton of value out of a lot of the points that you've brought up today. And how do our listeners learn more about you, Gage, or get a chance to peruse some additional thoughts?
Yeah, gauge.io is the homepage for my consultancy, as I mentioned. Being in the tech industry in the Bay Area has been a lot of DevOps, technical, system administrator, a lot of our technical tools. But in the last 2 or 3 years, I've pivoted into civic work. San Francisco Airport, County of Alameda, City of San Francisco, and I've enjoyed the cycles, the longer cycles for that. So those are two industries that I've been specializing in. Feel free to book a calendar invite. You can do so right on my website. And I'd love to talk with you about 20 or 30 minutes and find out who you are and what you're doing.
Love it. Especially the focus on the civic work. That is such a cool space right now. Mm-hmm. Awesome. So thank you again. And hope you have a great rest of your work week.
Great. Thank you, Lija.